Hi, welcome to my channel. Join me for my first episode of building a zoo in Planet Zoo. We started off with the fun bit, building a path. Now, this was the first time I was building with a grid and I was having a lot of fun doing this, trying to figure out building a rectangle basically. And in the end I ended up with this shape. I left 2 spaces to put information buildings in. It made sense to me. I had a bit of fun trying to get them even in the boxes. But yeah, I got there in the end. I then moved on to build some toilets. I then started to figure out where I wanted the staff path to go, and my current idea for the zoo is to build the staff areas all around the outside of the zoo. So this was the start of it. I then started building my first enclosure right at the entrance, and I sort of had a shape in mind of how I wanted it to go, and then I figured that I wanted to change it slightly because I was slightly inspired by when I've been to zoos, and there's always been the outer enclosure where the animals can go outside, and then there's always the shelter that's in the front that guests can look into. And so I wanted to create a little area where I could build a shelter that the animals could go into, and also that the guests could still see them. So this was when I started to figure this out. I then realised that I wanted to build the shelter, which meant using the invisible walls, which was also the first time I was using this. And then I started to figure out what walls I wanted. It took me a while to figure out which one I wanted. I then ended up choosing the first one that I picked out. So that was a waste of time, but anyway. I chose this very, very plain grey wall, and then I built it on the grid to build it so it was even. Again, I love building with the grid system now. I can't believe I've only taken until now to actually discover it. I then decided on where I wanted the glass to go so the guests could look into, and I figured that this wall made sense. I then had to move the barrier so that I could put in glass. Then I had to make sure that the wall was on the outside of the enclosure so that it was balanced with where the wall was. Once I'd messed around with that, I then moved on to adding a gate, and then I started to add the glass in. I raised the glass up so that it was in line with the wall and made sure that it was in a straight line. Once I've made those adjustments, I then decided to make the enclosure a bit smaller because I realised I made it huge. And this is a problem I commonly have. I like to make big enclosures for the animals, but then I realised some of the animals are very small, and that's because I wanted to add an armadillo into this enclosure. So I then realised I had to make the shelter way smaller than I already had it. I adjusted all of the borders again, realised I didn't need this wall, I did fencing in, so I had to make a lot of adjustments to what I'd already built, which is a little bit annoying, but at least I figured it out now because it was time to add the roof. And same thing with the walls, it took me a while to kind of figure out what roof I wanted. I went with the second one that I was looking at because it looked decent to me. Used the grid again to build the roof. And then I decided to add the ceiling as glass. Then I started to add the pathing. That path looks really wonky now I look back at it, but then I did make a few adjustments because the path was not working. So I went back to my grid and figured out making a path right in front of the shelter. I then started to adjust the staff path at the back and added in all the things that I needed. So all the staff buildings, power and water treatment, so that they were ready for when I added the animals to the enclosures. I added all the important staff buildings to the back. I left them plain for now. I was going to go back and adjust them once I'd finished a few other things. I had fun again with the path, trying to make it look nice. It doesn't look great, I can't lie, but this was better than what I had before. And once I had the path done, it was time to add my staff. So I did all of the important staff to my zoo and adjusted the work zones accordingly to the entrance. And I'm going to really try and keep it organised, because usually with my zoos is I don't really organise work zones very well. I mainly just do it like as a whole work zone, and it works, but I wanted to try and keep the zoo organised, so this is the start. We'll see how we get through it. I then picked out the armadillos that I wanted, so I added a male and a female, so a breeding pair with the best genetics and appeal. I had a look at what land area they needed, and I come to realise that the space that I've put them in is still way too big. Surprise, surprise. I added some glass into the front of the enclosure, and then this is when I saw how tiny the armadillos were. And yeah, this was when I started to figure out I needed to add another animal to this side of the enclosure, but I'd spent so long building the enclosure and wanting the armadillos to be a part of it that in the end I figured, why not split this shelter into two and then just make another enclosure on the other side? And so that's what I did. So this is the armadillo section. I've made it a lot smaller because of their size, just so that basically I don't have to make it so they can still travel around, but also people can see them. So I adjusted the enclosure a few times and then decided I was very excited about this. I added a little doorway for the armadillos to get in to the shelter, and so they could use half of it and the other animal that I would have could use the other side. And it took me a while to figure out what animal I wanted. At one point I wanted a Komodo dragon, but then I realised would they go next to each other? I don't know. So then I started to move the armadillos over and started to adjust the building again, which was all fun. Once I'd done that, I had a little search of what animal I could possibly put into the enclosure according to the size of the space they needed, and also just what animal would go with an armadillo. And originally I wanted to add an animal that I'd never had in a zoo before, so I had something a bit new, but in the end I did go with an animal that I've had before, but that I thought kind of made sense having it next to an armadillo. I don't really know my sort of like what I was basing it on. Because of the invisible fencing, it was quite hard to figure out the enclosures. Anyway, in the end, I decided on the tapir to go into the enclosure. So I picked out a male and female from the list that I could purchase, and once I'd done that, I added them to the enclosure and moved both animals into their enclosures before I could start decorating them, which is honestly my favourite part. And the first ones that were in were the armadillos, so it was time to decorate their enclosure. I also had to adjust my pricings for the zoo because people were very annoyed that they were paying to get into a zoo that had no animals. So made them happy, and then I had the fun time of trying to make a water source for the armadillos, and this took me probably at least 20 minutes to figure out. I've cut a lot of it out, but I kind of gave up with that after about 10 minutes, so I moved on to just building like the ground for the armadillos, creating a dirt area for the inside and sand all around the outside, with some grass on the outside so that I could put some nice plants around. And yeah, once I did that, I do come back to trying to make the water source, and again it took me a while. Then once I was happy with the water source, I checked to see what the armadillos needed in terms of plants, and I had a lot of fun looking at all the plants I could use and placing them all. I then started to look at what else the armadillos needed in terms of food and enrichment, so I just put out bedding for them and food trays, and then I looked at the enrichment. Then it was time to add rocks, and I had a lot of fun with this. I then started to add piles of rocks that I created, but honestly looking back, I'm not the biggest fan of some of them, so I probably will go back and fix them in the next episode, which I haven't filmed yet. But yeah, I don't think they look they're very good, but I tried. I then added some more plants just to kind of help out with the different colours in the enclosure, and yeah, I had a lot of fun with this. I had a lot of fun with both the enclosures, to be honest, and I'm excited to do some more, because this isn't I wouldn't say this is my forte, but I feel like I've definitely got better at sort of decorating the enclosures, and it's a lot of fun once it's done. Then I started to add educational speakers to the armadillo enclosure, because education is probably the most annoying thing to get right, I feel, in Planet Zoo, so I just started off with those just to get started. I then decided to add some donation bins, and what I like to do is I like to make them the same colour as the animal that they're like represented by, so I had fun doing that. And then it was time to adjust the enclosure for the tapirs, and I was just so excited to make another water area. It was a little bit easier for the tapirs because they kind of needed more water and to make it deeper because they like to swim, and made sure that it was definitely in the area of water treatment. And then yeah, once they were happy with that, it was time to adjust the land again. I added the same dirt into the shelter and then a bit of dirt around the outside where they kind of would move, or where the keepers would move, like kind of like a travelling path. And then it was time to add some of their enrichment and food and some bedding into their shelter as well. Once I was done with that, I did start looking at plants, but I didn't actually add that many. I ended up adding just the common reeds, which is probably my favourite thing to add to any water area in the zoo. I then started to look at decorating the underwater area. I then added some more rocks in the back, and I will admit I think these look slightly better than in the armadillo area. I think I know the issue that I have with putting the rocks down, but I mean, I'm saying that, they don't look great, I can't lie, but I do fix them later on, I promise. Then it was time to add some education boards to the enclosures. And of course I ended up with the board upside down, so once I'd fixed that, I added the Tapir one and I also added the armadillo one. I then sorted out the Tapir speakers along the outerior of the enclosure. I then adjusted the donation bins again, and they are according to the colours of the tapir, although it doesn't look like it. It was then time to decorate the staff and guest buildings, and honestly I had such a difficult time with doing this information building, and it doesn't even look great, but I did get it in the end. I did cut a lot of my building work out because it just took me so long. I then realised that the armadillo was pregnant, so we were going to have armadillo babies, which is very exciting. I then started to decorate the armadillo enclosure a little bit. I found some little signs, so I put them outside. I then added some more education boards and obviously made them the same colour as the donation bins. Once I was done with the education stuff and the ATM, it was then time to build on the staff building, and I decided to use the same wall as I used for the shelter behind them. and of course I used the grid system, which I was very excited about, that it kind of fitted perfectly over all of the staff buildings, but it does make it slightly difficult when I get to the roof part. And honestly, I think this is going to be something that I have to do a bit of research on, because I don't understand how some of the roofs kind of fit with the grid. So in the end I sort of had to customize it a little bit, and yeah, I had to place all these roofs individually, but we got there in the end, and after a long time figuring it out, I ended up with this roof. It doesn't look great, I can't lie, but it is what it is. It was then time to add more rocks. I wanted to add something into the shelter because it looked a bit plain, so I thought rocks would make sense. And again, they don't look great, but they look a little bit better in my opinion when they're sort of individually placed, even though it takes longer. I added some more into the actual enclosure for the armadillos, and yeah, I wasn't too mad about these, but I definitely have some room for improvement. I then started adding some more rocks into the tapir enclosure, so I changed up the rocks that were in each enclosure because the armadillo's enclosure was a little bit more like deserty, and the tapirs were more for like a rainforest, and I thought it was quite a nice distinction as well. So yeah, lots more rocks. And then I came to realise that I'd forgotten to put more plants in the tapir enclosure, so they were not happy. Also, I was keeping the game partly on play because I needed to save money. I didn't have a lot of money at one point, so I just let the game play while I was still building, which seems criminal in Planet Zoo, but it had to be done. I started to add this hedge around the outside, but looking back, I feel like I need to make adjustments to it. And then I started to add more bushes, and I added quite a lot to this enclosure. I had a lot of fun just putting bushes around the enclosure basically, and putting some flowers and such, because they love them, so I could put lots in. I always find it difficult with the animals that don't like that many plants, like making it look good. So once I'd done that, we had armadillo babies. I was so excited, they were so small. But of course, when babies come, it means that the enrichment is all messed up. So we had to add more enrichment things because we had babies. I can't believe how many babies there were as well. They were so cute. And then we had a tapir baby as well, so we had to add enrichment for the tapirs as well. The baby was so cute. I didn't realise this tapir was really excited to be lying on my rocks, which I was really glad that it was making the most of them. And we come to the end of episode 1 of building in Planet Zoo. I had a lot of fun building the first 2 enclosures, building the entrance. It's a little bit, it could be better. I really think it could be better, but I'm still sort of getting the hang of building more in Planet Zoo, and I'm excited to carry it on forward. So hopefully, if you like this video, join me for another episode soon, and I will hopefully see you next time. Thank you for watching.